The quiet rancher saw his neighbor throw a mail-order bride's bag into the mud. Pick it up. The bag landed in the mud with a sound like a wet slap, like something killed. I was on the far side of the street in front of the feed store and I heard it before I saw it. You learn to hear things like that out here. The sound of something dropped on purpose has a different weight than something dropped by accident. Accident is a clatter, a bounce, a man swearing and reaching down. Purpose is a flat, finished sound. No reach after, just the sound and then silence. I looked up. The bag sat there in the mud, a dark, soft-sided traveling case, the kind a woman packs with everything she owns when she doesn't have much. A small brass clasp at the top, one handle still looped over itself from the throw. It had opened a little at the corner when it hit, and a corner of white cloth was working its way out of the gap like something trying to breathe. Behind it, on the 2 steps that led up to the porch of Walt Gruder's house, stood Walt himself. He was a big man, gone soft in the middle but still big, and he had his arms crossed over that middle and his chin tucked down the way he did when he'd made a decision about something and was done talking. I'd known Walt Gruder 15 years. He had that look when he overcharged a buyer for cattle and the buyer was starting to realize it, and he had it now. A man with all the cards, or who thought he did. Beside the steps, not on them, not up on the porch, but on the ground beside them, the low place, stood a woman I'd never seen before. She was small, that's what you saw first. Not frail, there's a difference, and I'd learned that difference, but small-framed, fine through the shoulder in a traveling dress that had started the day gray and was now the color of dried creek mud from the knees down. She was looking at her bag in the mud, not at Walt, not at the street, at the bag, and her hands, which were down at her sides, were completely still. I've seen frightened women, and I've seen women who'd gone past frightened into something else, something further in, further back. A place where a person goes when the thing they feared most has just happened, and there's nothing left to fear because it already happened. She was in that place. I set down my sack of oat seed. I should say what I knew, which wasn't much. I'd heard the same thing everyone in Dalton's Creek had heard, which was that Walt Gruder had sent for a bride. He was a widower, his kids grown and gone to Denver and Amarillo, his ranch house sitting empty and large, and someone, his sister, I'd heard over in Abilene, had put him in contact with an arrangement service. A reputable one he'd been at pains to tell people at Hendricks on a Saturday night 6 weeks back, not some catalog outfit. A real arrangement. The woman had a name and a history and had agreed to the arrangement of her own choosing. He'd said it the way he said most things, like the words were also a warning. I hadn't thought much about it. Walt was Walt, a practical man, not a warm one, not someone I liked or disliked in any significant way. He ran his cattle close to my fence line, and we'd had words about it twice in 15 years, and both times it came out the way these things do, a settlement that satisfied neither man, but that both accepted because the alternative was worse. He was my neighbor the way a stone in your boot is your neighbor, present, unchangeable, and something you work around. I hadn't thought about the woman. I was thinking about her now. I walked across the street. It takes about 12 steps to cross the main street in Dalton's Creek at that point, in front of the feed store and angled toward Gruder's place. I have crossed that stretch of ground hundreds of times, going from one errand to another, and I have never once counted those steps or thought about them. I counted them this time. I don't know why. 12 steps, and the mud was deep from 2 days of rain, and my boots went into the ankle on the 4th step, and I felt the pull of it on the 5th and 6th. The way wet ground holds you a half-second longer than you planned. The woman heard me coming. She turned, not in a startled way, but slow, the kind of slow that isn't slowness but is instead a person being very careful, bracing. She had dark eyes. Brown going to black, the kind that look like they're still deciding. High cheekbones, a straight nose, a mouth that was pressed together not in cruelty but in control. She couldn't have been more than 28-30 at the outside. There was a small cut on her lower lip, fresh, the kind you get when you bite down on the inside of it hard enough to bleed without meaning to. I didn't look at Walt yet, I looked at her. "Is this yours?" I said and nodded at the bag. She looked at the bag, then at me, then at the bag again. "Yes," she said. Her voice was low, even. She had a slight accent I couldn't place, not Eastern exactly, somewhere in between, somewhere that wasn't here. I picked up the bag. It was heavier than it looked. I could feel the weight shift inside it, and I righted it, careful, and pressed the clasp back until it caught. The white cloth went back inside. I handed the bag to her by the handle, and she took it. and her hand closed around the handle the way a person holds something they didn't expect to get back. Then I looked at Walt. He hadn't moved from the steps, still arms crossed, still chin down. He had a small, set smile now, the kind that isn't friendly and is meant to show you it isn't. "Holt," he said, "my name just that." "Walt," I said. "Business of yours?" I thought about that. 12 steps, the pull of the mud, the bag with the clasp and the white cloth. The woman's hands completely still at her sides before I got there. The place she'd gone to past frightened. "It is now," I said. "My name is Cal Holt. I have run the Ridgeback. That's my ranch, the Ridgeback, named for the long spine of rock that runs the length of the North Pasture for 22 years. I came to Dalton's Creek at 31 with a land deed my uncle left me and a horse and about $80, and I have not left since. I am 53 years old. I have never been married. I have had 2 friendships I would call real friendships in 22 years, and both those men are dead now, one from a fever, one from a horse fall, and I have not replaced them, because the kind of friendship I mean is not something you replace. I am not a man who explains himself. I work the Ridgeback with 2 hired hands, Tomas and his nephew Bateau, and I keep the books myself, and I go to town when I need something from town, and I come back when I'm done. People in Dalton's Creek know me the way you know a mountain. It's there, it doesn't change. It's not going anywhere, you don't need to talk to it. I have never picked up another man's thrown bag before that day. I want to be honest about why I did it. Not because I'd planned something, not because I had a thought in my head about where it would go. I heard the sound of a thing dropped with purpose, and I looked up, and I saw a woman standing in the low place beside the steps with her hands at her sides, in a place past frightened, and I picked up the bag. That's it, that's the whole of the why. Some things don't require more explanation than what they are. Walt said, "She's going back." I said, "Going back where?" He uncrossed his arms. He had big hands, Walt, wide across the palm. He gestured at her the way you gesture at property, palm out, a display. "Wherever she came from, the arrangement is done. She arrived last evening." He paused, and then, because Walt Gruder was a man who always made sure you understood he was not the one at fault, she was misrepresented. I looked at her, she was looking at Walt. Whatever she was thinking, it was contained, tight, internal, no leak at the edges. "Misrepresented how?" I asked. Walt looked at me with the look of a man who has decided to be patient with you and wants you to know it's an effort. "That's my business, Holt. The arrangement is dissolved. I've got the stage scheduled for Tuesday. She can wait at the hotel and I'll pay her fare back." "Tuesday," I said. "Day after tomorrow. Today is Sunday." "I'm aware of the day." I looked at the woman again. The white cloth was pressed tight inside the bag now, the clasp holding. She had one hand around the handle of the bag and one hand at her side. She was looking at the ground between her feet, not in defeat, but in the way that people look at the ground when they are thinking hard and have learned to keep the thinking inside. "What's your name?" I said. She looked up. The question surprised her. I could see it move across her face, a small thing, a flicker, like she'd been braced for something else. "Anna," she said. "Anna Meredith." "Miss Meredith," I said, "I have a cook's room at my ranch that's sitting empty. You can stay there until Tuesday, and I'll bring you back for the stage myself." Walt made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, a short exhalation of disgust or amusement or both. "You don't know her," he said. "I know you threw her bag in the mud," I said. "That's enough." She said yes. Not right away. There was a moment, a pause in which she looked at me the way you look at an offer that might be a different kind of problem than the problem you already have. I respected that. A woman alone in a town she doesn't know, and a man she doesn't know either has just offered her a place to stay. The caution was sense, not insult. "You have help on the property," she said. "Other people." "2 hired hands. Tomas Verla and his nephew, they sleep in the bunkhouse. My house is separate." She thought about this, looked at Walt, who had not moved, and then back at me. "The room has a bolt on the inside?" she asked. "It does," I said. "Then yes," she said, "thank you." We walked to my wagon. I loaded her bag in the back and she climbed up to the bench and sat straight, her bag in the bed behind us, and I drove us out of Dalton's Creek while Walt Gruder stood on his steps and watched. I didn't look back. I could feel him watching. Some people's watching has a weight to it, and Walt's did. We went about a quarter mile out of town without speaking. The road runs north from Dalton's Creek through a break in the bluffs and then flattens out into the long open country. And when we came through the break, the plains opened up in front of us. Late afternoon gold and green, and the far edge of the sky beginning to go red. She said, still looking straight ahead, "He said I was too thin." I didn't say anything. That was the misrepresentation. He said he'd specified a particular build and the arrangement service had not delivered what he specified. She paused, as if I were a piece of furniture. "You're not furniture," I said. "No," she said. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "I'm not." The cook's room is off the back of the main house, connected by a short covered passage, and it has its own door to the outside and a window that faces the north pasture. There's a bed, an iron one with a straw tick that I'd had Tomas put new ticking on the previous fall, and a washstand and a small stove for cold nights and a chair and a table. Utilitarian. The bolt on the inside was iron solid. She looked it over without comment, which I took as approval. I showed her where things were, the pump in the yard, the outhouse, the kitchen which she could use freely and which I asked her not to feel obligated to cook in. "You're not here to work," I said. "You're here to wait out 2 days until the stage." She said she understood. Tomas had seen us come in. He had the sense to say nothing, just touched his hat brim at her and went back to what he was doing, which was mending a section of tack near the barn door. Biteau, who was 19 and not yet in full possession of his face's ability to hide things, had stared for a moment until Tomas said something quiet to him in Spanish, and he'd gone back to staring at the tack instead. I made supper. I'm not a bad cook. I've been feeding myself for 22 years and I've gotten competent at it, which is different from good but serves the same purpose. I made beans and salt pork and cornbread and there was coffee, and I knocked on the cook's room door and said there was food in the kitchen if she wanted it. She came out. She'd changed out of the mud-hemmed dress into a plain dark one, and she'd washed her face and hands, and she sat at the kitchen table across from me and ate without ceremony, which I liked. There are people who turn eating into a performance of some kind, looking at the food or commenting on it or not eating enough to be polite, and she was none of those. She ate. She drank her coffee. When she was done, she said, "Thank you." "This is good," and I said, "It's beans," and she said, "Yes," in a way that meant, "I know what it is and it was good anyway." That first night I lay in my bed and looked at the ceiling for a while before sleeping. I have a habit, when something's sitting on me, of working it out that way, flat on my back, ceiling above, until whatever is sitting on me gets sorted or until I'm too tired to think any more and sleep takes it. I've solved more than a few problems that way. Also confirmed more than a few things I already knew. What I was doing that night was not solving a problem. I was sitting with a fact. The fact was this: I had stepped into something. I had stepped in of my own will, eyes open, no one asking me. Walt Gruder was a man who took note of things that ran against his preferences, and I had stepped against his preference in front of the street and 2 men from the general store who'd been watching from the door, and this was a small town, and small towns remember. He would not forget this, and he would not let others forget it either. I didn't particularly care about that part. What I was sitting with was the other part, which was that the woman asleep in the cook's room 12 feet and a wall from where I lay had been in a strange place when she arrived, and she would be in a strange place when she left on Tuesday, and the stage would take her back to wherever back was, and that would be the end of the thing I'd stepped into. 2 days. She'd be gone Tuesday noon, and I'd go back to the Ridgeback and the work and the quiet. That was fine, that was as it should be. I had done the thing that needed doing. A bag in the mud, a woman in the low place passed frightened. I'd picked up the bag, 2 days and done. I slept. Monday she was up before me. I came out of my bedroom at first light and there was smoke coming from the kitchen stovepipe, and when I came into the kitchen there was coffee already made, dark and real, and she was at the table with a mug of it, reading. She'd apparently found the 3-year-old almanac I keep on the shelf beside the stove for the weather tables, and she was reading it the way some people read novels, with full attention, like there was news in it. I poured a mug and sat down. She looked up. "I hope you don't mind, I couldn't sleep past 5. "I don't mind," I said. I drank the coffee. It was better than mine. The proportions were different, less water or more grounds or both, and it had a dark, almost bitter edge that opened up after the first swallow into something richer. I didn't say anything about it. She was looking at the almanac again. "Do you farm?" I asked. "No, I was looking at the frost tables." She turned a page. I had a kitchen garden in Indiana before she stopped, turned another page. Before. I didn't ask about before, not my business and not the moment. After a while she said, without looking up, "What do you grow?" "Cattle mostly, some winter wheat in the south field, alfalfa for the hay." "How big?" "Ranch 430 acres. I run about 80 head. She considered this. The way she considered things was interior. You could see her taking it in, but the processing happened somewhere behind her eyes, not on her face. "That's a lot of work for 3 people, she said. "It is," I said. She nodded and went back to the almanac. I went out and started the day's work. It was Tomas who told me, mid-morning, about the fence. I was checking the condition of the posts along the east line, a job that wants doing every spring, and Tomas came up on his horse with the look of a man who's thought carefully about what he's about to say. "The northwest corner," he said, "the Gruder line." I looked at him. "This morning," he said, "3 posts down and the wire cut. Your steer, the big roan, is in Gruder's south pasture." I didn't say anything for a moment. The northwest corner of my property ran along the south edge of Walt Gruder's holdings. That fence line had been contested twice in 15 years. The last time, 3 years back, 2 of his men had ridden the line in a way that was meant to be noticed, and was. Nothing had come of it because I'd gone to Walt directly, and we'd had the settlement that satisfied neither man. 3 posts down and the wire cut was not wind. Wire doesn't cut itself. "When?" I said. "Before sunup, Bito thinks. He was up early, couldn't sleep, heard the roan bellowing." Before sunup. Before I'd come into the kitchen to find her with the almanac and the good coffee. Someone had been at my fence line in the dark before sunup. "The roan's all right," I said. "Fine, Bito's with him." "Bring him back and fix the fence," I said. "Use new posts for the 3, not splice. And I want the wire checked both directions from the cut, 50 yards each way, for anything else." Tomas said he'd do it and rode back. I stood on the east line with my hand on a fence post and thought about Walt Gruder on his steps with his arms crossed and the look of a man who held all the cards. I went back to work. She was in the yard at noon. I came up from the south field, and she was standing at the fence of the near pasture, watching 2 of my horses, a gray gelding and a younger bay mare I'd bought at the Abilene market the previous fall, standing in the shade of the single cottonwood at the pasture's center. She had her arms resting on the top fence rail, and she wasn't doing anything, just watching them. I almost went straight to the house, then I stopped. "The gray's 14, I said. "Bay is 3, figuring out the hierarchy still." She looked at me, then back at the horses. "The gray's not worried about it," she said. "He doesn't need to be," I said. She almost smiled again, that almost smile. "No, he knows what he is." I stood there a moment. The afternoon was hot, the sky hard blue, a hawk going over in wide, lazy circles. "Did something happen?" she said, still watching the horses. "Fence trouble on the north line," I said. "It's handled." She was quiet for a moment, then Walt Gruder. "It wasn't a question." "I don't know that," I said. "I do," she said. She straightened from the fence rail, crossed her arms over the front of her dress, a self-possessed posture, not a frightened one. "He told me last night, I should say the night I arrived before, he told me that in this county his word was the word. That's the phrase he used, the word. Not his word, the word." She paused. "Men like that always do something when they don't get the response they expected." I looked at her. She was looking at the horses again. "I've had one neighbor for 15 years, I said. "He is what he is." "I'm sorry I brought this on you," she said. "You didn't bring anything," I said. "I walked across the street on my own feet." She looked at me then, a direct look, the kind that takes a full measure. The brown going to black eyes, the composed mouth. Some people look at you to see what you want from them, and some people look at you to see what you actually are, and she was the second kind. "Why?" she said. I thought about it. The same thing I'd thought about that first night on my back looking at the ceiling. "The sound the bag made when it hit the mud," I said. "Something dropped with purpose sounds different than something dropped by accident. I've spent 22 years learning to hear the difference." She was quiet a while. The hawk had gone. The gray horse moved out of the shade, unbothered, and the bay followed. "My husband died," she said. "That's what was before. I had a farm in Indiana with him, a small one, and when he died the land went to his brother and I had nothing, and the arrangement service was a practical decision. A practical decision that turned out to be. She stopped, looked at the horses. Well, I'm sorry, I said. About your husband. It was 2 years ago, she said. I'm all right. She said it like it was true, not like she was trying to make it true. There's a difference. I went inside. Tuesday morning. I was up at 4:30, earlier than usual. Lying in the dark, I'd come to a thing I'd been working around for 2 days, the way you work around a loose board in the floor, stepping over it, knowing it's there, until finally you just stand on it and feel it shift under you and decide. The thing was this: she was going back to nothing. Not to Indiana, not exactly. She'd said the land was gone, the brother-in-law's now. She hadn't said where the stage would take her, and I hadn't asked, because I'd been very clear in my own mind about what the 2 days were. A place to wait, a stage on Tuesday, done. A thing I stepped into and stepped back out of, and no further claim on my attention. I stood on the loose board, I felt it shift. A woman who'd had a farm, who could read frost tables in an almanac with real interest, who'd been up before first light to make good coffee and read about weather, who'd looked at a 14-year-old gray gelding and said he knows what he is. This woman was getting on a stage at noon and going back to whatever back was, which was nothing. Because I hadn't asked. I wasn't romantic about it. I want to be clear on that. I am 53 years old and I have been on my own for 22 years, and I do not have the kind of head that fills up with romantic things. I thought about it the way I thought about fence lines and cattle and winter wheat, in terms of what was real and what could use doing. What was real? She was alone, practical-minded, capable, and good-mannered without being soft, and she was leaving at noon because that was the arrangement and neither of us had proposed a different arrangement. What could use doing? I could propose a different arrangement. I lay in the dark and thought about whether I would, and by the time gray came into the sky I'd decided I would. And then I lay there a while longer thinking about whether it was right too, whether it was what she'd want, or whether I was making an assumption I hadn't earned. Then I got up and went to make the coffee, and she was already in the kitchen making it. She was at the stove, her back to me, and she turned when I came in, and for a moment we stood there in the gray, early light of my kitchen, two people who had come separately to the same place at the same time for the same reason. And then she turned back and poured 2 mugs and set one at my place at the table. I sat, she sat. We drank. The coffee was good again. Same proportions, that dark edge opening into something richer. Outside the kitchen window, the sky was doing the thing it does in that hour, going from gray to a very pale yellow at the rim, the kind of light that makes the whole world look like it's still deciding. Anna, I said. She looked at me. If you wanted to stay, I said. Not the cook's room. I mean, if you wanted to make something here, I would. That's something I'd want to think about. With you, if you did. She held the coffee mug in both hands, the way you hold something when you want to feel its weight. She looked at me across the table for a long time. Not the measuring look, exactly, something more still than that. I don't know you, she said. No, I said, neither do I know you. I know a little, she said slowly. I know you walked across a street you didn't have to walk across. I know you asked me my name when you didn't have to do that either. I know you have a 14-year-old gray gelding that knows what he is. She looked down at her coffee. I know the fence on your north line was cut last night, and you didn't tell me because you didn't want me to feel responsible. I said you noticed. Tomas was upset about it. He didn't think I could tell he was wrong. I drank my coffee. She said, what would it look like if I stayed? Slow, I said. Careful, we'd have to know each other first. I paused. There's work on this ranch, and I could use the help, and I don't mean that as the pitch. I mean there is genuinely work, and 2 people do it better than 1. And I am not a man who pretends things are something they're not. She looked up at me. I know, she said. The sky through the window had gone from pale yellow to something warmer, the first real light starting to find the tops of the bluffs to the east. In the pasture, the gray horse was standing at the fence, watching the light change the way horses do, with their whole attention on something that doesn't require attention and couldn't care less about them. She said, I'd want to see the north pasture, the rocky spine, the one it's named for. I'll take you up there this morning, I said. All right, she said. She went back to her coffee. I went back to mine. The stage left at noon. We didn't talk about the stage. We rode up to the ridgeback at mid-morning. I put her on the bay, the 3-year-old, the one still sorting out the hierarchy, because the gray was steady but spirited, and I didn't know her riding yet. She mounted clean and easy, adjusted herself to the saddle without fussing, took up the reins short the way a person takes them who is used to a horse that wants to go. "She'll test you a little," I said. "First 50 yards, once she settles, she'll behave." Anna nodded. She let the bay have the first 50 yards, and the bay did test her, a jog step sideways, a toss of the head, and Anna sat it quietly, no drama, and then the bay settled and they moved out together with no further disagreement. I noted this. We rode north and up, following the dry creek bed that runs along the east side of the property and then switchbacks up through the brush to the higher ground. The morning was already warm, but there was still a breath of night in the air at the creek bed, the kind of cold that pools in low places and doesn't burn off until midday. She rode without talking, which I liked. There are people who feel silence as an absence and people who feel it as a thing in itself, and she was the second kind. The ridgeback is not dramatic. I want to be honest about that. I have heard ranches described with a romance they don't have, and the ridgeback is not like that. It is a long, flat-topped spine of rock, gray-brown granite with a slight blue cast in certain lights, running northeast to southwest along the top of the north rise, maybe a quarter-mile end to end. Juniper and scrub along the edges. Wind almost always wind. From up there you can see the full spread of the ranch below, the house, the barn, the bunkhouse, the south pasture and the wheat field, the 2 horses in the near pasture, the long straight line of the east fence running to the horizon. We dismounted and stood up there and looked at it. "How long have you been here?" she said. 22 years. She looked at the spread below for a while. "You built all of it." "Most of it. The house was standing when I came. I've added to it twice." She nodded slowly. She was looking at the fence lines, I realized, tracing them, the long east line, the angles of the other boundaries. "The northwest corner," she said. "That's Gruder's line." "Yes." She was quiet a moment. "What will he do?" I thought about this honestly. Make trouble, likely, for a while. He's a man who doesn't like to be crossed in public. He'll make trouble until I've stood up to it enough times that the trouble costs more than the grudge, and then he'll stop. "You've done this before, with him." "Twice in 15 years, I said. "Same pattern both times." She turned and looked at me. The wind up here was steady, and it moved her hair across her face, and she pushed it back with one hand. "You're not worried," she said. "No," I said. "Why not?" I thought about that too. "This is my land," I said. "I built what's here. I know every foot of it. Walt Gruder has never been able to take anything from me in 15 years because there's nothing to take that I'd give him. He can cut my fence. He can spread word against me in town. He can make things harder for a while, but he cannot tell me what this place is or what I am on it." She looked at me for a long time up there, the wind steady, the ranch spread below us. She said, "He knows what he is." Said it quiet, like the thing she'd said about the gray horse, but not about the gray horse anymore. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that needed saying. We stood there a while longer. The sun was climbing and the light was getting hard and the blue cast was coming into the granite of the ridgeback. That slight blue you only see when the light hits it at a certain angle, and it's the thing I've come back to look at more times than I could count. "All right," she said finally. I looked at her. "All right," she said again. "Slow and careful, we'll have to know each other first." She almost smiled. "You're not romantic about it." "No," I said. "Good," she said. "Neither am I." We went back down the hill. The stage left at noon without her. I know this because Tomas, who had gone to town for a bag of flour, reported when he came back that he'd seen it depart, and that Walt Gruder had been standing at the edge of the street watching it go. What Walt's face had looked like when it went, Tomas didn't say and I didn't ask. I could imagine it, and I found I didn't much care about the imagining. She was in the kitchen when Tomas came back, making bread. She'd found the flour and the starter I keep in the cold larder, and she'd asked, politely, not assuming, and I'd said yes. Bread was bread, and the starter had been going since winter and wanted using. The kitchen smelled like it hadn't smelled in a long time, the warm, dense smell of bread working. Tomas came in for his noon coffee, saw her at the board with the dough, and looked at me across the room. I said nothing. Tomas poured his coffee and went back out. A minute later, I heard him say something to Beto in Spanish in the yard, and I heard Beto's response, which was short, and then silence. She shaped the loaves without looking up. Her hands knew the work, the rhythm of it, the fold and press, the quarter turn. You can tell when someone knows a thing in their hands rather than in their head. There's no thought in it, just the doing. I sat at the table and did the week's accounts. We didn't talk much that afternoon. We didn't need to. There was trouble from Walt in the weeks that followed, and I won't pretend otherwise. He spread word in town that I'd taken in a woman of uncertain character, which was predictable and which I addressed once directly at Hendricks on a Saturday night without raising my voice. The men who'd been listening to Walt, 2 of them, both of whom bought cattle from me, looked at their boots while I talked and didn't say much in return, and I considered that settled. He cut the fence again, second time, 3rd post from the corner. I fixed it and sent him a bill for the materials, written in my clearest hand on the best paper I owned, as if it were a business transaction between 2 reasonable men. He did not pay it. I didn't expect him to, but the bill went to the county clerk as well, as is my habit when I want something on record, and Walt knew it had. The 3rd cut never came. She was not easy, and I was not easy, and there were days in those first months that were hard in the particular way that days are hard when 2 people who have both been alone a long time are learning to be in the same place. We argued twice, once about the south pasture fencing, which she thought was inadequate for the cattle weight I was running, and she was right. Once about something smaller that I've half forgotten, some matter of the kitchen larder, and in both cases we said the thing plainly and worked to the resolution, and that was that. No lingering, no performance. She started a kitchen garden in the spring. The frost tables from the almanac, I think, had something to do with the planning of it, because it was laid out with a precision that was not casual, rows calculated to the light and the drainage, a cold frame at the north end for the early starts. She grew things I hadn't grown, beets, some variety of cabbage, a row of onions that came up in May in tight green stalks and smelled like rain. Tomas approved of the garden. He said so to me once briefly with the sideways approach he uses when he is not sure the information is wanted. The garden is very good. I said I knew. He said, she knows what she is doing. I said I knew that too. I want to say a true thing about the morning in early summer when I knew. Not when I decided that morning in the kitchen over the coffee and the almanac. I mean when I knew, the way you know the ground is solid when you've put your weight on it enough times in enough weather, when you stop checking. It was before dawn and I was up early for the calving. One of the cows was close and I'd been checking her through the night, and I came back to the house at first light and she was asleep. The door of the cook's room was open. She'd started leaving it open in spring, which was its own kind of thing, the small shift of it, and I'd noticed without remarking on it. I could see her from the hallway, the shape of her in the gray light, on her side with one arm under the pillow and her hair loose the way it went at night. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just that. The smell of the kitchen, last night's bread and coffee, and the faint green smell of the herbs she kept in the window box. The sound of the place, which is a sound I know so well I don't usually hear it. The particular silence of the ridgeback in the hour before the birds, which is not actually silence but is the accumulation of very small sounds. The house settling, the wind against the north face, the horses shifting in the pasture. I knew, standing in that hallway, that this was the shape of things now, that she was part of the sound of the place, and had been for a while, and that I'd stopped checking. I went back to the cow. The thing I should tell you, the thing I don't know how to say correctly, but I'll try, is about the evening in October when we were up at the ridgeback for the last light. We'd taken to going up there on evenings when there was no urgent work, just the 2 of us on the horses. The bay had long since decided she approved of Anna, which was clear in the way horses make things clear, a forward-pricked ear, a lean into the scratching hand at the jaw, the unhurried step when Anna mounted. The gray had opinions about everyone and had suspended them regarding her, which amounted to the same thing. We sat up on the ridge in the last of the October light. The season had turned hard the previous week, the first real cold, and the bluffs to the south were going ochre and rust, the scrub juniper very dark against them. The ranch below had its lamps on already, the yellow light from the bunkhouse window and the kitchen window, and the air had that particular smell, cold and clean and smoke. She had her coat pulled around her, and she was looking out at the spread of land below, the full reach of it in the last light. She said without looking at me, I wrote to the Indiana County clerk to update my address of record. I looked at her. For the official record, she said, in case anyone needs to find me. What address did you give them? I said. The Ridgeback, she said. Dalton's Creek, Colbert County. She looked at me then, direct, the brown going to black eyes, and there was something in them that was not the measuring look and not the composed, careful look, but something underneath both of those, something warm and still and sure. I told them it was permanent. I didn't say anything for a moment. The last light was going, and the lamps below were coming up brighter in the failing day, the yellow squares of them against the dark of the land. I reached out and put my hand over hers where it rested on her knee, just that. The size of her hand under mine, the cold of her knuckles from the October air, the way she turned her hand over after a moment so the palm was up and her fingers closed around mine. Settled. We sat there until the light was gone. Then we went back down to the lamps. I am 53 years old and I have run this ranch for 22 years, and I have been a lot of things in those years. Stubborn, solitary, capable when it counted, slow to speak and probably slow to a few other things as well. I have built what is here out of a deed and a horse and $80 and 22 years of cold mornings, and I have buried 2 friends and kept my fence lines and stood up to the same neighbor twice and the same neighbor again, and I am not a man who expects what he hasn't earned. I walked across a street one Sunday afternoon in mud over the ankle because a bag landed with a purpose sound, and a woman was standing in the low place beside the steps with her hands completely still. That's where this starts, with the sound and the mud in her hands. She's asleep in the other room right now, or was an hour ago. Tomorrow she'll be up before me and there will be good coffee, and she'll probably have the almanac again because she's been watching for the first hard freeze and wants to know the beds are covered in time. I'll go out to the north line and check the posts, habit now, every second week, and Tomas will be at the tack and Beto will be watching the gray gelding with that look he has, like he's learning something. The bread will be in the larder. Walt Gruder is 3 miles that way. He has his place and I have mine. What I have is this, a ranch I built and a woman who looked out at it from the top of the ridgeback in the October light and gave the county clerk a permanent address. I earned that, not by being young or easy or without fault, by being what I was, consistent, and walking across a street when the sound was wrong and not looking away. That's the whole of it. The lamps are low now and the house is quiet, and outside the north pasture the gray horse is standing in the dark like he does, watching whatever horses watch in the dark, knowing what he is. I know what I am too. Finally,